Cole. Mr. Cole's recognized.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank you for your really hard and genuinely bipartisan work on this. I know we have a disagreement with the administration over the use of OCO funding, but back off a little bit. How close are you to what the president asked for in terms of total spending?
Mr. Cole, we exactly match the president's request. And I mentioned, I think maybe before you stepped into the room, that level is what General Dempsey and others of the Joint Chiefs have said is the lower ragged edge of what it takes to defend the country for fiscal year 16. And we match that level exactly. And the other thing we do is we authorize all of the OCO and non-OCO funds program by program so that we do line up exactly with what the president asked for. And so it, you know, while I understand the concerns about using OCO and a lot of the criticisms that Mr. Smith made, I think are legitimate about not being able to plan and so forth. When you look at this bill for this coming fiscal year, they match precisely with what the president asked for.
Again, it's a little bit off point, but I can see where we will have differences on different appropriations bills. We always do. We had a couple in here 2 weeks ago which passed across the floor that actually had more money than last year, MilCon and energy and water. Not quite what the president wanted, but above last year's level. Certainly no sequester cut there, quite the opposite. They were plussed up. I happened to handle one of those bills on Labor H where we were below what we spent last year, certainly below what the president requested. I can understand the difference there. I have a hard time understanding when you match dollar for dollar and program for program, and this is such an important issue, and we've got troops in the field right now. You know, these other programs are all important. I'm not diminishing anybody, but it's not like that. It's not like we have men and women in harm's way. And we basically, we're quibbling over how we pay for something, but not over whether we pay for it. We're right on line. You know, is the administration giving you any indication that they're willing to sign something like that? Save the fight for something else. Let's fight over something where we have a genuine disagreement instead of over one where we evidently have no, at least financial disagreement.
No, as a matter of fact, my impression, and this is just an impression, is that at least some people in the administration want to what they say is leverage defense to get more spending in other areas, which concerns me because, as you point out, we are talking about men and women today risking their lives in various places around the world. Without a National Defense Authorization Act, they don't get paid. There are at least 40 specific authorities that require a defense authorization bill in order to carry the program out or to carry the function out. And so to try to leverage that necessity to try to hope to get some spending in other areas, I can understand the desire for spending for medical research or whatever it is, but to leverage, to basically use these folks as pawns in that game, I think is wrong.
Yeah, and I don't want to deny you an opportunity if you want to say something, Mr. Courtney.
Sure. Thank you. Good to see you, Mr. Cole.
Good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me pinch hit. I would just simply point out that Secretary Carter, has pointed out the planning issue, which Adam mentioned before. But frankly, there are other concerns that he raised about the fact that, DOD's mission is not carried out just within the stovepipe of the DOD budget. For example, the Department of Homeland Security Coast Guard budget is critical in terms of escorting ships and submarines into ports all across the country. They are still subject to the spending caps. The shipbuilding budget for the Coast Guard, we have one functioning large icebreaker in the entire fleet of the Coast Guard. It's 50 years old. There's one other one, but they use it just to cannibalize for parts. And so, the shipbuilding account is just totally left stranded by this approach of just dealing with one department. The Office of Naval Reactors, which is the office that basically the nuclear Navy operates out of, I mean, they're funded not just by the Navy, they're also funded by the Department of Energy. All the reactor planning and construction that Admiral Richardson oversees in that office, again, is funded also by the Department of Energy. So you've got these imbalances that, when you talk about national defense, are still being sort of left unaddressed.
I think that's a more than fair and a very good point, and the same one the chairman made. But just for the record, in the case of, if I'm correct, on the nuclear issue and energy, that need was met. I mean, there's extra money in the energy and water bill that passed the floor last week. I think most of the administration's concerns there, which we share, were actually plussed up in that bill. That's one of the reasons why it came in above the sequester level. So, again, I'm mystified here. And again, I'm not trying to be critical. People are allowed to approach things in different ways. I've always thought in a negotiation, get the things that you agree on off the table. And you can usually find a way to work out the rest. I don't think this will work particularly well as leverage for anybody because we don't disagree. We agree with roughly the same amount. And look, I'm one of these ones that hope we get to a higher discussion. To my knowledge, I don't think the president's called for one, and I'll leave that to him and our leadership to know when the appropriate time is. I'm not being critical, but I would always be in the school of sooner rather than later in terms of these things. I think that discussion needs to happen. But here, I mean, I am mystified that we would fight over something where we're basically in agreement. And I understand these other issues, but I think on the defense parts of them, they'd all be sorted out in the respective bills. I really do. I think the country is trying to speak on one voice where this is concerned. Let me ask just one other question, if I may, and let both of you respond. We meet the needs for this year, the requests for this year. But, Chairman, I asked you and asked my friend from Connecticut then, looking down the road, both of you have thought long and hard about defense, and we do have some disagreements looking at the president's budget and the Republican budget over what we should do in the out years. How do you see defense spending going in a rather uncertain world? And where do you think we ought to be headed to? If you look at the two respective budgets, do they have what we need? Obviously, you'll reassess that judgment every year, but as Mr. Courtney says, some of these things are years in the planning when you're talking about deploying weapon systems and modernizing base structures and what have you. It takes multi-year planning to do that.
Short answer, Mr. Cola, is no, I don't think we have what we need. To repeat again, this is the level General Dempsey says is the lower ragged edge of what we need this year. As you well know, as part of the QDR, Quadrennial Defense Review process, we set up an independent group of experts to look at kind of the broad direction of defense spending and programs called the National Defense Panel. They came back with their recommendation last year, which argued for significantly higher defense spending now and into the future. And I think part of that was informed by what's happening in the world. We have had testimony in our committee, the Senate has had testimony that at least since the end of World War II, and maybe ever, have we experienced so many complex national security threats all at the same time. So the traditional ones of great superpowers like Russia, China with nuclear capability have not gone away. But meanwhile, we have dueling terrorist organizations. We've got these rogue states of Iran, North Korea. We have cyber. We have outer space. Who did we send to deal with the Ebola crisis in Africa? We sent the military. So this huge array of challenges is not going to go away or get simpler. It's going to get more complicated. Now, that does not mean we solve everything just with more money. That's part of the reason I put such an emphasis on agility. And I think it is our responsibility, as well as the other committee you serve on, to try to make better use of taxpayer resources and to make sure that we are agile enough to deal with this broad array and the stuff we don't see coming. There are threats we cannot predict. But we can't do that with lower resources. So if you put it all together and count inflation, defense has been cut 21% in the last 4 years. That's what's happened. And the world is not 21% safer than it was 4 years ago. As a matter of fact, I think it's the opposite. So I think we're going to have to have reasonable increases in defense spending in the coming years, but we also have to do our work to try to get the most out of each of those dollars.
I would really just second what the chairman's comments are. I mean, I would just sort of throw in the Asia-Pacific, emerging threat, which, there's so many to tick off that was sort of left out. But and the Sea Power Subcommittee, which I'm ranking member of, I mean, that's obviously a huge focus in terms of the shipbuilding account. And, Mr. Byrne is on that subcommittee, and I think, he would confirm the fact that, when you look at a 30-year shipbuilding plan where we are right now, we got challenges ahead, particularly with the recapitalization of the ballistic submarine program. So, but frankly, to me, that sort of is why, again, everything the chairman said about the quadrennial defense review, the challenges that we're facing, the external threats, but the bottom line is that you can't even sort of begin to really, I think, get serious about addressing that until we get this Budget Control Act chainsaw, turned off. And that's really what I think is motivating Adam's comments that we're here this evening. It is not about trying to challenge whether or not the chairman's, perspective in terms of threats and our nation's challenges are off base. I think there's total agreement.
Yeah, I had the great privilege my first 6 years to serve on that committee before I went to appropriations, where I get to serve on defense approps. And I have to say it's one of the most bipartisan committees in Congress. I mean, I always appreciate a night long of debate and argument. I guess you guys went to like 4 or 5 in the morning, and if it's a typical defense bill, it passed out like 62-1 or something like that. But that tells you how you reach comity on that committee continually and have under successive chairmen of both parties. So it's a pretty special place. Let me just end with this, and it's a comment, not a question. Look, I understand the president's concern over the BCA. And in full disclosure, I voted for it because we were all told sequester wasn't going to happen. I'm sure the president signed it because he believes sequester wasn't going to happen. He advocated for sequester. So it's if we just appropriate, the law's still there, and it comes in January. And as appropriators, we're living under the BCA levels. OCO is a way out in defense, if you will. But I would just urge both sides to get to that larger discussion sooner rather than later, because there's no way the Appropriations Committee or you guys can act any differently than you are. But if we're going to have a disagreement, I wouldn't have it over here on defense, where I think we effectively agree on the amount, what needs to happen this year. We're going to have plenty of other areas, and believe me, there's plenty of concern about everything from National Institute of Health to other programs, where there's actually bipartisan support for doing something significant. So I think there's groundwork there. I would just hope the administration, where we can agree, takes those things out of the fight, and particularly in this one. I mean, if all things get caught up in an end-of-the-year budget battle, it shouldn't be the defense of the United States, and I don't think either side wants it to be. I don't think it has to be. So hope we can get there, and just, again, thank both of you for the terrific job you do on one of the great committees, and for putting the people that defend us and put their lives on the line every day first and foremost. I think all of us in Congress and the administration ought to do that on this bill. So thank you very much. You'll back for the manner in which you've worked together. This is one of these very challenging issues. My friend Mr. Issa said it pretty well. It's a delicate balance. And I actually appreciate both sides in the debate we tend to have over this. I think they're both performing an invaluable function. There's always tension in a democratic society between security and liberty, and those that think we're going too far are doing us a service when they raise that question. Those who are pointing out the dangers that we face are also doing a service. And I really appreciate the manner in which, and what we all acknowledge is a difficult time and a difficult subject, that you've managed to find common ground, work together, bring us forward a product that reflects the majority, overwhelming majority, clearly, of your committee, and probably will reflect the overwhelming majority, although, again, I recognize those in dissent are performing a valuable function as well. So I just, this is the way Congress ought to operate. And I certainly recognize my friend, the chairman.
Well, I thank the gentleman for yielding. It's already been said that it's been delicately negotiated, but I think it's also important to note that what you just said is absolutely true. We can have very, very high levels of protection of our civil liberties and high levels of protection of our national security at the same time. And I think this bill accomplishes that by raising the protection, the transparency of the court, barring the government from bulk collection of metadata. And by the way, not just under Section 215, but under several other authorities as well, and not just telephone metadata, which was the subject that brought this on, but any kind of metadata that the government might choose to collect and store for long periods of time. But in addition to that, the bill also has a number of key provisions that do not affect the civil liberties of American citizens, but allow our national security agencies to keep the country safer. If somebody who is not a U.S. citizen is entering the country and we're attempting to track them, when they enter the country, the authorities change and law enforcement has to go to this Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court to get the authority to do that. While that's occurring, it could take a few days to do that. While that's occurring, this individual, suspected terrorist, could go dark in the United States. This bill will allow that surveillance to continue for 72 hours while they get that authority to continue the surveillance. Also from the standpoint of protecting civil liberties and making sure we're being careful about our national security.
Certainly.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with everything the chairman just said. I just want to add one thing as a general observation about the bill. There has been some criticism of it. I was about to say from the left, but it's also sort of the same criticism from some parts of the right. It's an interesting area. But almost all of that criticism, maybe all of it, is of the nature that the bill doesn't do things it doesn't do. It's not criticism of what the bill does do. It's criticism the bill doesn't take care of this problem that we don't deal with or that problem. I just want to observe that some of that is valid, but that it is rarely, in my opinion, a good criticism of a bill to say it doesn't do everything that we'd like it to do. The basic criteria in judging a bill or anything else is, are we better off with it or without it? And other problems it doesn't deal with, you can try to deal with in other venues. I've heard almost no criticism of anything the bill does do.
Well, to your point, I commend you for acting in a timely fashion as well. You not only brought us a product that we know you'll be revisiting us with. Things have to work out in other venues here and decisions be made, but I think it's very important that the protections and the guarantees not lapse, that the focus be on it. And again, I just commend you all for working in a very bipartisan fashion. Respect those who criticize, but I think your points, Mr. Nadler, are exactly right on. The basic question is, you're better off with it or without it, and I don't think there's much doubt we're better off with this thoughtful, delicate compromise, my friend Mr. Issa said, than we would be if we just simply allowed legislation to lapse. So thank you very much. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.